I think your mic is a bit blown out.
Oh, no, you don't!
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of HardcoreGaming101.net's top 47,858 games of all-time podcast, where we objectively, definitively, and scientifically rank the games you nominate on Twitter. I'm not Xerxes, and I just got done hacking my car to play Pac-Man. There's absolutely no way this could go poorly. My panelists today are...
I'm Bobinator.
I am Satanga.
Dr. Robotnik, the most cunning scientific genius in the world!
On this podcast, we have 3 rules. Rule number 1, all rankings are final, official, and scientifically accurate. Rule number 2, you can nominate one game via a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. We've stopped accepting nominations via Twitter for the foreseeable future. And rule number 3, you can nominate games that have already been nominated, but don't nominate games we've already ranked. You can see the master list for yourself. Check out bit.ly/47kgames.
Oh yes! Attack Sonic, now!
We're getting to it, hang on.
This is quite a raucous guest we have here. I mean, Mr. Robotnik, it's, Dr. Robotnik, it's good to have you on and all, but, I am a little nervous, I admit, so, tell us about yourself a little, just break the ice, if you will.
You know nothing, fool!
Well, I guess not, that's why I asked,
I've got big plans, and now I'm gonna put them to work!
Yes,
ambitious!
So our game that we've got coming up is Sonic Adventure for the Dreamcast, and also later on ported to the GameCube, the PC, and others? Not sure on that.
Apparently not very well either, from what I've heard.
So, this is Sonic Adventure. It was developed by Sonic Team. Wow. It was published by Sega, and it came out on the Dreamcast on December 23rd, 1998, which, if I'm correct, that was the Japanese launch time for the Dreamcast, because it was a launch title. And this was nominated to us by K Kickflip on iTunes, so thank you for that. Bob, I know that you really want to talk about Sonic, so why don't you sort of give us the intro to this game?
Well, this is the first Sonic game released after I guess kind of a hiatus in the Saturn era. Well, technically they did release Sonic games on the Saturn, but no new games officially released by Sonic Teams. They kind of
what about Super Sonic Racing?
That's
that one?
Not a Sonic Team game is what I meant to say, so...
Damn, okay, well...
I know this game was in development for a long time. It was originally going to be a Saturn game. Only real idea of what that would have looked like is the Sonic World bonus mode from Sonic Jam. And it's
Which was just a fun little bonus mode. It's very short, but it was probably the most interesting part of Sonic Jam.
And this game is something that introduced a lot of things to the Sonic universe in both gameplay and story-wise. Some of which kind of worked, some of which didn't, and we should get into that.
We haven't got time to waste, so come to attention!
Okay.
Pushy, wow.
Oh man, I don't even know where to start with this game.
Yeah,
I guess...
I mean...
Can we just describe Sonic Adventure? I mean, it's not the most... It is a famous Sonic game in a sense, but I think we might need to just go into a little bit about what it is, because it's not completely obvious. It's called Sonic Adventure.
Yeah, I should put out on a meta note that this is actually the very first of Sonic's many games that we are finally talking about on this program. So,
Mario games?
2 so far, I think. So, that we're catching up. I think there's another...
Actually, let me think. There's Mario 64, Yoshi's Island, Yoshi...
Oh, right.
Mario Pinball Land, Mario Brothers 3...
Oh. Okay, then 5-ish. Finkel, then. Better late than never. Here we are talking about Sonic now, which, Bob is a big fan of Sonic on the whole.
It's really happening, just as the stone tablets said it would.
Yeah, that's a lot of foresight. I mean, does it say anything about us being, like, a mega-rich #1 podcast that's, like, iTunes mascot or whatever?
Uh-oh. Yeah. Gotta go!
Describe the game. It is, unusual, because you have about 5 different characters, each of which have to have a storyline that has to be finished to get to the real ending of the game, and each of them plays somewhat differently.
And technically you have 6 characters, but one of them is Tails, and he mostly plays the same as Sonic. But you have Sonic, and he plays as closest to a normal 3D platformer, I guess. You have Tails, who, as I said, plays mostly the same as Sonic. I think the only real difference is he can fly to an extent, the same way Tails has always done it. And then there's Knuckles, who, again, mostly the same gameplay, except he can glide and climb up walls, but he actually gets a small truncated area where you have to play kind of a hot-cold minigame of finding the emeralds around the area, or shards of the emeralds, or pieces, or whatever Knuckles does.
And there's Amy, who's kind of a slower platformer with a gimmick that you're constantly being chased by this invincible robot that you can't ever get rid of.
Her mode is also the most puzzle platformery. There's actual elements of puzzles in her. Some levels you have to pick up items and put them into like slots and things, and there's like little bits that she actually has to solve, which is interesting. After Amy, you have E102 Gamma.
Yay!
In his one and only canon appearance in a Sonic game. He shows up in Sonic Shuffle, but that's not canon. And he has one of the more interesting modes, which is a lock-on shooter style thing, which I guess is, what would you say, it's like Panzer Dragoon, where you control your character, is essentially where they went with that?
I wouldn't say it's that much like Panzer Dragoon, since you're not always on rails. You do have free movement, even if you're kind of just supposed to just go generally forward and just kill everything. I mean, maybe there was some inspiration. It's not impossible.
Because, you know, they have a mini game in this one, which is Panzer Dragoon, where you called Sky Chase, where you get to fly around on the Tornado and assault Robotnik's egg carrier ship.
Yeah. Well, we still have one more character to talk about, however.
No, we don't. We don't.
No, there are 6.
There's no. So,
Bob,
talk about the giant fat cat in the room.
Do we have to?
Well, he was voiced by Duke Nukem, so I think we're kind of forced.
Alright. There is a 6th character, yes, by the name of Big the Cat.
How to play as that fat cat?
I don't know how you play as him, actually, because here's the deal. Do you know what your action platformer needs? It needs a semi-realistic fishing sim.
No way! I can't believe this!
I know, right?
It seems gratuitous because, like, I forget if it was a launch title, but there was, like, another Sega fishing game on the DC that had, like, a fishing rod controller for it, so why was this needed?
Well, you can actually use that controller in the Sonic Adventure, so
Gasp.
Maybe they were just really desperate that someone please buy their fishing controller.
I feel like Sega must have had the sort of, like, had the engine for fishing and was like, alright, we'll just put it in the Sonic game. That's cool. That's fine. Boy, I did not enjoy the big segments. I haven't talked about the earlier segments as much, but big is, like, I think it's only 3 levels long, and the second level, I spent an hour and a half to 2 hours trying to catch the fish and frog, and it wouldn't do it. You know, he'd sniff at the rod, he'd bite the lure. I collected all the lure upgrades, I collected all the rod upgrades, and it was just like, nah. Okay, so stepping back to the game itself, it is not played as a traditional platformer because you have hub worlds instead of level by level. And yeah, of course, Mario 64 famously has its castle hub area, but Sonic's is different because it's presented as a living city that progresses as you play the game. So Sonic starts off, or whichever character you choose to play, but you have to unlock all the characters by playing as the other ones. Basically, if you play Sonic, you'll meet Tails, and that will unlock Tails, and you can keep playing through Sonic, and he meets everyone, but some of the other characters do meet other characters, so I think it's possible to cross-unlock characters via playing different characters. So the game actually doesn't force you just to play as Sonic to unlock other characters. It's a very experimental way to get characters. Anyway, so you have the hub world, and then you bump around, you talk to a floating ghost orb that tells you to go places, you talk to a newspaper, which is very up-to-date and incredibly specific about what you need to do, and you just bump to different areas. So you'll go to the beach, which will take you to the first level, progress a little further, you'll end up at the Mystic Ruins, and you'll solve a little puzzle. Yeah?
That's a small thing I wanted to point out. How many presumably American towns are there that you can end up, like, South American ruins from a train ride? I mean, it's not quite as weird as the pyramid in San Francisco, but...
I guess this is just what Japan thinks of how the rest of the world is.
Well, the great joke about that is what happens when you talk to the people there. They're like, wow, we just discovered these ruins.
Yeah, that's an aside point. Why does this game have realistic people in it? Like, Robotnik's been the only human ever, and he does not look like these humans. Like, it freaks me out.
He's been redesigned to look more like a normal human. I think his redesign is very successful. I like his new design. He still flies around in the Eggmobile, so it's all good.
Oh, yeah. Also, for better or worse, this was also the game that, as they did with the Princess Toadstool to Peach, it more or less decided to officiate his name from Dr. Robotnik to Dr. Eggman, but I still like Robotnik, I'm going to be honest. So
I don't really... I feel like they went with an interest... They looked at the US and went, okay, we call him Eggman, they call him Robotnik, let's try and coalesce these together, because I think as far as we can tell, he is actually called Robotnik.
Yeah.
But Sonic calls him Eggman, and it's kind of like a insult nickname that he also adopts himself, kind of deal, so I think canonically you can call him Robotnik if you want, or you can call him Eggman, and both are correct, which is nice.
Well, come to think of it, we do have the man here himself. Does he want to set the record straight?
What is this? I am Dr. Robotnik, the most cunning scientific genius in the world! Enough!
So, yeah. So he is still a Robotnik in this game. I guess it's sort of a transition, but yeah, it is just a weird little point I wanted to mull on.
No, it's important that this is a point where suddenly we had a conclusion to the is it Eggman or Robotnik debate to an extent, which was good. So the levels of this game are pretty good. We got to kind of go in a little bit of detail because each.
As you might expect, the Sonic levels are generally the most entertaining, at least in my own opinion.
Mm-hmm. This is the most fleshed out campaign, too. Like, what you play with him is about the length of any of the older Sonic games, and, everyone else is, they are what they are for all their elements.
Well, the way the game's designed, kind of interestingly, is most of the levels are played by Sonic, and then everyone else gets a sort of remixed version of those levels, so... Knuckles, some of his levels are parts of Sonic's level, kind of expanded out a little bit. And one of Amy's levels is just a Sonic level that's been chopped up into parts. And then they added a bit in the middle that's not in Sonic's campaign. And that's kind of how they reused a lot of their resources between the campaigns. But Sonic has some original levels, to an extent, because I think Tails visits most of Sonic's levels, kind of alongside him.
Yeah, also, like, I think I occasionally got confused on this, but, like, there's also this loosely connected hub also that you can freely roam around, which I don't know if that even makes it a sandbox game, but, you can fart about your own leisure before you go around to do any of the actual straightforward stages. I forget, though, did any of the hubs, like, integrate into any of the actual action levels?
Yep, okay, so the hubs, as I was saying before... they are mostly just level access, but they progress as the game goes on, so characters will move around. So, for instance, when the game doesn't want you to go to the Mystic Ruins, the train workers will actually go on strike, and you can't get on the train to go to the Mystic Ruins. And there's this one guy who talks about how proud he is of his building, like, the entire game, and eventually you get to go into the building when you get a keycard to let you into the building. And there's a couple of items that you have to collect hidden in the hub world. You don't actually visit the hub worlds during levels, they are distinctly separate, but the hub world has, like, little bits of pieces. I love that there's a character that's basically stalking this shop attendant. She's just watching him from really far away, and as you get further in Sonic's levels, she gets closer and closer to the guy into his shop, and he just gets really uncomfortable, and you get to, like, see this happen in slow motion. You can steal a golden chow egg from a guy, which is great. That's a nice little touch that you can... steal from him using a rock.
We haven't really talked about the chows much. This was the first game that they factored in, so I'm not sure how much.
There's so much stuff in this game, and they just kind of threw everything into this. And
yeah,
it really shows that they kind of went. Maybe they tried to do too much.
That includes a sort of Harvest Moon-esque simulator where you raise these little chow babies. I forget exactly how you do that, but I remember that the original version of the game had integration with the virtual memory unit, which was not only the memory cards to the Dreamcast, but they also had like their own mini games that you could download that integrated into the big games also.
World's crappiest little LED screen on the front. Could play a handful of games on, and also I think it consumed a watch battery at an alarming rate, if I remember correctly on that one.
I forget exactly how the Chow Gardens work, though, so I don't know what to say.
Yeah, so the gardens, the way they work, it's really fascinating how they must have come up with the Chow Gardens, because it feels like someone must have went, alright guys, alright, so we've got this game, but how do we convince people to replay the levels, you know? How do we make them play them again? And it's like, okay, well, you know, Robotnik's robots, they have animals in them, right? So what if you could collect the animals, and then give those animals to a virtual pet, who would then turn into those animals, and then would get stats from those animals, and then could race against other versions of these pets in a side thing where they race against each other. And that's all implemented into the game for some reason. And it's crazy. They have done this before. I think Knights had an element of virtual pet in it in the Knights games, or maybe that's only the Wii Knight game, so maybe they continued it from there. Anyway, the Chows are a substantial part of the game for something that is completely and totally ignorable in every way. I guess to its benefit, you don't have to engage with them at all. There's no, if you don't beat the Chow game, you can't finish the last level. I really do like the Chows. They're kind of cute, and they're kind of fun, and they do genuinely feel rewarding, because when you finish a level with rings, you can buy things from the Chow Black Market, which is, you know, extra stuff for your Chows, and when you finish a level with little animals, you can feed the animals to your Chows, although they don't eat them, they just kind of rub them on their faces, so it's not violent or anything.
It does feel weird to mash into a game that's already trying to pile several genres into the same disc. But
I don't think anyone knows exactly, even, like, especially Sega themselves, really knew where they were going with this game. Just like, we're gonna make Sonic, but it's gonna be bigger and bigger and just a lot bigger, you know?
It does feel like a good chunk of this game was really more like vision before production, and I actually kind of like that aspect to it, aside from Big sucking really hard. I appreciate this game's experimental, what do I say, joie de vivre? I don't know if that's too pretentious, but it does sort of feel like the sort of, you know, balls out, do whatever we want type of game that you would see back then and that you barely, if ever, see nowadays. And I say this as somebody who, I'm going to admit, throw your eggs at me, am not a big fan of Sonic. But this was the very first Sonic game I've actually ever beaten, if you can believe it. So I have a little bit of sentimental... Yeah, believe it or not, Doc, I do have some sentimental attachment to this one.
Okay.
When I got a Dreamcast for Christmas one year, I forget when, probably 2000, I guess, this was the game that really said, this is next gen, this is a big deal for me, because even before I got this game, I was a huge Sonic fan, and this really just blew me away. Like, holy crap, there's full voice acting, holy crap, the game starts with the boss fight, holy crap, there are these gigantic hub worlds, just everything about this game was just mind-blowing for me at the time.
This is a very interesting game to me, because I feel like in 1998, this was this insane game. This was absolutely wild. It was crazy. Like, whoa, it's got 6 whole different genres in it, and it's got snowboarding minigame, and it's got sky chasing minigame, it's got hubs, it's got all this stuff, but it's a platformer with voice acting and lip sync.
Well, it was early technology. No one really knew what they were doing with it, so I can forgive it for how hilarious it looks. I don't know.
I've heard people suggest that the lip syncing might be weird because they didn't bother redoing it for the English version, so all the lip syncing is for the Japanese version of the game. I'm not sure how true that is.
Nah, it's believable. That's usually a classic thing in a lot of anime dubs as well. That often gets mocked, so yeah, it's probably the case.
But yeah, so this game was huge, and like everyone knows the whale. You know, everyone knows the killer whale. When at the start of the game, Sonic's running, and then the bridge starts breaking, and he's bouncing, and there's a big killer whale jumps around and stuff.
I'm sure most people would agree that the Sonic levels are kind of the high point of the game, but I do feel like this is kind of where the game's kind of went a little bit more about really cool set pieces and going fast, and there's kind of less emphasis on platforming, and there's not much in the way of the physics engine that made the previous game so special. And that is kind of a bummer in my book.
Nah, you got a point there. I mean, Adventure was, for its time, a pretty damn big hit, so then Sega felt, why don't we just make the next 5 games like this, but increasingly crappy? And it has been relatively diminishing returns. Say what you will about Sonic Adventure 2, but I don't think it has quite as much sentimental appeal as the first one did. It felt more, like, structured, whereas the first one here is just all balls out and crazy and do whatever the hell we want, and I want to say that's why I like it more than SA2.
Well, I think Sonic Adventure is the one where they kind of threw out, like, all their ideas, you know, they're just like, let's just, whatever we're gonna do, we're just gonna do everything, and we don't care. But we do care. We're gonna throw all of Sega's money at this game, and it's because it's got to sell the Dreamcast, and the Dreamcast has to sell, like, 1 billion units, otherwise Sega's going bankrupt. So, here we go, we're all in on Sonic Adventure. So I think that it lends this wildness to Sonic Adventure, which they obviously toned back for 2, where they were like, okay, maybe we should ditch the hubs, obviously we should get rid of this stupid purple cat, and they started to just rip parts of the game out, because this is the first Sonic game that tried to have a full serious story. I think that they felt that it worked, because they kept that for Sonic Adventure 2. They refined the way Sonic played for Sonic Adventure 2. Like, a big difference they made between 1 and 2 is in 1, you get this new Sonic ability. He's got the homing attack, which is good, very useful. They've kept that for all the 3D games, pretty much, because it's quite good. But there's the ring dash, or whatever it's called in this game. I literally can't remember. But it's where you hold down a button, Sonic charges up for forever, and then he can connect through a series of rings. Like, he can just whoosh through them from the first ring to the last ring. And the game uses it to hide some secret areas and to force your progression and things in places. And it's okay. But it takes forever, so it's not a very fun mechanic to use. So in the second game, they're like, okay, well, let's just make it instant. And suddenly in the second game, you have all these moments where you can just, like, jump, and then you're in midair, and then you can hit the ring dash, and he'll just dash through this string of rings, and you can bounce off an enemy and then dash through another string of rings, and there's this nice connective sense, which I think is the biggest thing that I have against Sonic Adventure. It just feels like every time you kind of feel like you're getting into the groove of the game, or that you kind of feel like, oh yeah, I feel this game, or I'm starting to have fun, the game is like, okay, well, here's a pit that you can fall into. And you're just like, what?
Yeah. On a somewhat objective view, the game nowadays would probably be considered kind of sloppy. I don't know, it's probably just due to nostalgia, but this is honestly, for a series that I'm probably a total idiot on examining and I'm not the biggest fan of, this is honestly still one of my favorite Sonic games there is, and I don't know how Bob feels in comparison.
I feel like for the Dreamcast, it is a great piece of software to show off just exactly what the system is capable of, and it does a lot of things with the series that kind of been still kind of going on to some extent or another from this rate, and the Sonic levels are fun. I do have issues with them. The other stuff is kind of varies. I've never been a huge fan of anything that does not directly involve Sonic, but I do appreciate them trying something new, but that does give me one small rant I'd like to make real quick. Anytime they try something new in the series and it doesn't work, they just dump it. They just never, ever go back to it, and they just completely forget it ever happened. It's kind of annoying, because
How to play as that hedgehog.
Because, you know, what happens is, after this game, but they very quickly started to go, alright, let's get rid of the ensemble cast, let's focus more on Sonic's gameplay. And I know that the next immediate game, Sonic Adventure 2, they sort of they kept some of the elements, but they'd already started, you know, they stripped out Amy's game mode, they stripped out Big's game mode, they kind of truncated Sonic and Tails, they got rid of Tails' game mode and combined him with E102, and then the games after that, basically everyone just plays like Sonic, for the most part, like, pretty much every game after it, it's like Sonic with it.
Play as anyone but Sonic, so who wants to hear my different ranking? Between GoldenEye and Mega Man 3.
I had to find GoldenEye in the list.
Yep.
Number 40.
Stop reading and start the game.
Alright, somewhere within that Panopticon. Interestingly enough, between those three are Maniac Mansion, Ape Escape, and Crash Bandicoot 2. Very interesting to place it near Ape Escape and Crash. It's almost sort of comparable since those games were released only like a few years before, and they're also fairly mascotty in their design. So, the question is, does it place better?
I would
than
say Sonic Adventure is much more ambitious than Crash or even Ape Escape.
I agree.
I think I'd be willing to go out and say Sonic Adventure was the most ambitious platformer produced to date when it came out. You can talk about Mario 64 being important, and it's way more important, but for the most part, it was an iteration on what Mario and Nintendo and Argonaut had done up until that point. Sega tried to throw everything that existed into Sonic Adventure. It doesn't work, okay? That's why it's never going to reach that level. But it was stupidly ambitious. But I don't... Should we just be flatly rewarding blind ambition and a kind of madman's dream?
Honestly, I think in this case, yes. It was probably the biggest breath of fresh air that Sonic had received and would receive for quite a while, if arguably not forever. I mean, this was I think the last really big blowout game before, and maybe, except for Adventure 2 also, but shadows were looming on the horizon, and the series would...
There.
Wow, I didn't even intend that. Oh, thank you. But, yeah, things would definitely get worse from here for a while. Then when it bounced back on Colors and Generations, those are quite good games, but they didn't really do anything original in so much as they did just kind of get back to the basics of what made Sonic good. So, as what might arguably be the last truly original and progressive step for the series in terms of originality, I do think we should give Adventure a fair deal of credit.
How about between Maniac Mansion and Ape Escape?
That sounds good to me. Cal,
that's
what do you
not
think?
bunching up platformers. I know you don't like that.
Not usually, but in this case I'll allow it. I do think that's kind of hard to gauge where else to place a game. It's just this weird and experimental, so having a bit of reference is helpful in this case.
Any objections?
You two are bumbling idiots. You know that.
Well, you haven't really helped much, you know?
Yeah, I mean, where would you put it? Would you, agree?
Better things to do.
Oh, well, why did we even invite you on in the first place? Oh. Alright, well, if that's the case, then, I'm going to vote for those two, since Robotnik's a little indecisive. Cal, what would you say, just to clinch the vote?
We actually only have 4 people on right now, and since Dr. Robotnik has ceded his ability to change the ranking for the game, I can't really move it anywhere if you two believe that it should be above Ape Escape. I wish Sonic Adventure was much better, is the short of Sonic Adventure to me.
For the most part.
I really wish Sega had have just went, alright guys, let's make a good 3D Sonic game. And I think maybe that's an impossibility, and they realized that during development, so they just started to pile in loads and loads of random crap, because they went, we can't make this good. I don't know what we're doing. We need to put more stuff in this to make it like a value for money, to make it a game that people will want to buy. Because it kind of strikes me cynically as that, because they could have. I would have thought that they would just try and make Sonic really good, but no, they just added things to see if they could maybe make it work. And when Sonic works in this game, it actually works pretty well. I really like Red Mountain. That level is probably the best or second best level in the game. It's actually just about as good as any Sonic level has been. It's got great music, great setting. It's got this really creepy inner cave stage with like prisoners and tombs and things. Really cool stuff.
That's weird in a way I like things being weird. I will grant that Adventure 2 is the more refined game, but Adventure 1 felt a bit more passionate in a way. Just like, this is the sort of game you give a blank check to a studio to, and people are really excited about the Dreamcast. And this game really does sum up the legacy of the Dreamcast in a lot of ways. Crazy, balls out, experimental, and unfortunately doomed to crash earlier than we all would have liked it to. The story of Sega is something to be reserved for another time, and I'm not going to get into it. But let's just say I'm all for finalizing below Maniac Mansion above Ape Escape.
Go ahead. Edit it the way you want.
Well, we'll leave that to Jeff, but thank you. We appreciate it.
In the year 2027, the American Congress passes a poorly worded bill that inadvertently renders all video games illegal. Within 3 days, the entirety of the United States of America collapses into a post-apocalyptic hellscape. But for those of you lucky enough to live in the past, there's
Still time to donate to the Hardcore Gaming 101 Patreon. So give now, and ensure that the only thing keeping you awake late at night
is the ever-present threat of Mecha Hitler's cybernetic human extermination squads.
It's nice to have peace of mind. Alright, and our next game is the legendary ghost-themed Maze 'em Up, where you play as a gobbling face that consumes pellets, and that is, of course, Oh Shit for the Commodore 64, I believe. I played that. What were we playing? Right, we're playing Pac-Man.
Never heard of it.
Aw, come on, man.
Goddamn millennials ruining everything these days.
Oh! I was hoping you wouldn't take it there. I'll allow it this time.
It's going straight to it. So yeah, that was legendary game Pac-Man, developed by Namco, which I guess kind of selling the game short because it's more like 2 or 3 people at Namco. It's not some mythological like ultra company thing. It's just that. It was published by Namco in Japan, and because nobody thought it was going to be successful, it was published by Midway in the US. It was first released in the arcade. The date that I've got here is May 22nd, 1980. Now, can I quickly confirm, in Japan, is that the official release date, or is that the official first location date? Because I know that they did location tests first, which I think they often call their first release, but the general release was much later. A few months later, I think. I'm not sure which one we have here, but that is how it is. And we do have a special guest with us today to talk about Pac-Man, and that is our regular host, Xerxes.
Oh, yeah.
Hi.
What's up, kids? I'm glad I could make it to my own show.
Impressive. Gotta give him credit.
Yeah, what can I say? So I showed up for Pac-Man. Yeah, well, I mean, what could be said about Pac-Man?
Who wants to start? Pac-Man, it's the game that is probably the most important game released maybe ever, arguably. So
it is. It's interesting. You know, here's probably the best thing you can. Well, not the best, but the highest praise you can give to Pac-Man, in a sense, is to say that despite games like Super Mario Brothers and Doom and stuff like that, when you say video games to like the average person on the street, if they don't play video games, like they think Pac-Man. I think
it's Pac-Man. You know,
like Pac-Man is still like the default video game.
It's really interesting because, you know, I think especially America's and probably in Japan, you know, the default console for ages was the Nintendo. It was, you know, the Famicom was the Nintendo, whatever. So that's the default system. And even though the main game on that is essentially Mario, it's not the default video game, though. The default video game is Pac-Man.
Yeah.
It's always Pac-Man. It's really not hard to see why, because this original Pac-Man release was insane. This game did such impressive numbers. I have the number here because it's on Wikipedia and it's really easy to find. Over 2 years, you know, 1980 to 1982, Pac-Man made over $1 billion. That is not adjusted for inflation.
Yeah, Pac-Man, I think rightfully so, deserves its place in history because really its only competition is maybe Space Invaders. Maybe.
And that was slightly more of a Japanese phenomenon, I believe. Like, they went insane in Japan and did well everywhere else.
I mean, Space Invaders is a big hit everywhere. I mean, I think it was just like, it was the Japanese arcade game that took off in Japan, and that's why it's so well remembered, because it was their thing. And before that, video games, you know, were not necessarily like synonymous with Japan, which was the case after Space Invaders, and especially after Pac-Man, for the next 15 to 20 years, which is incredible, you know, for a you know, per capita, like a pretty small nation. But yeah, I mean, the thing about Pac-Man is like so, I mean, do we even need to describe Pac-Man? I know I've gotten in trouble for saying this before, but do we really need to?
Well, I described Pac-Man kind of artificially before, describing apparently the MVS smash hit, oh shit. But, alright, I mean, we should probably talk about Pac-Man in the basic sense that you play as a yellow hockey puck that eats dots in a maze and eludes a series of AI-controlled ghosts.
Right.
So,
That's
real quick,
well, not AI, but a AirSats AI type thing, like a pseudo AI. Yeah.
Well, AI it's either a true AI or it's not true AI. No video game has true adaptive learning AI. So I mean,
I would say AI, like the definition of AI would be like problem solving capability, and they definitely don't have that. They just have
it's
each
definitely
goes
pseudo pseudo fake
pseudo AI
brains.
in the sense that they do stuff that seems like they have personalities, but it really is just like code.
Cal, are you saying that this character you play as, he is some kind of puck-shaped man? A Pac-Man, if you will?
We're definitely
Yes.
going to go down the route of let's change the name of Pac-Man.
Yeah,
Like-
yeah. This is a very famous story, but yeah, when Namco was going to bring this over to outside of send this outside Japan to English speaking territories, somebody wisely is originally named Pac-Man because in Japanese is a language that's heavy on onomatopoeia, like words that are just sounds that turn into verbs type thing. So paku 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 is the sound of like chewing, like muncha 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 or something.
And it's
or
the sound
nom, nom,
Pac-Man
nom, nom,
makes.
nom. That was so it's called Pac-Man, and in the Japanese sense, when they read Pac-Man, they think paku paku paku. They think that extra U sound at the end. But when any other culture that understands even the slightest bit of English looks at it, they're thinking like, oh, that's they're dropping the F-bomb there. So like they know that when they see Pac-Man, that some enterprising young gentleman is going
get some
to
yellow
turn
paint.
into Pac-Man.
A jerk.
And and so that was smart that they changed it. And now at this point, even in Japan, sometimes you see it as Pac-Man because
I thought that they
paku,
basically
paku, paku is the sound.
canonically changed his name to Pac-Man.
To Japan, it makes no difference because they only have one vowel sound per vowel in a sense.
Yeah.
So paku paku paku, to us you could spell it paku paku paku, and it makes a difference with the U, but to them it doesn't make any difference. It's paku paku paku. So they don't care how they spell it.
I think the name change was also kind of super important because to me, Pac-Man is it doesn't sound Japanese, but it's an interesting name. I think if they had to call it, even if they call it like not just Pac-Man, which sounds kind of stupid, like maybe it's a hockey guy. It doesn't
Yeah,
really.
Even when they say it, they don't say Puck-Man.
Yeah,
It's
they
always
say Pacu.
Pac-Man.
And I think
Pac-Man.
that Pac-Man
yeah.
probably wouldn't have gelled as well. I feel like I don't want to like play like a race sort of thing, but I feel like if you'd seen a game called Pac-Man, you'd be like,
Yeah,
it sounds
I don't know whether it would have mattered in the end, but yeah, I think because at this point, Pac-Man is so ubiquitous that here's the thing about Pac-Man. All right, so how many Pac-Man games are there? When you think about it, not really that many. There's a lot, but for how popular the character is, not that many. When Netflix started putting out its own TV shows, one of the kids' shows they created was a Pac-Man show, and this is probably close to a decade and a half after the last popular Pac-Man game. Think about that, like broadly popular Pac-Man game, maybe even more than that. And that's how popular the character is. That my son, who barely is cognizant of like the Pac-Man, like the games, knows the character pretty well, just because it has an enduring appeal. And there's something about the design of the character, although it is basically just a like circle with a slice cut out of it, is really impressive in the sense that it has it is its own shape. Like nowadays, when people describe like old style like Mickey Mouse pupils, that you see like the characters have like a pupil with a little chevron cut out of it, they call them Pac-Man eyes.
Doesn't Pac-Man himself sometimes drawn with Pac-Man eyes just to really
Yes,
mess
he
with
is.
your head?
He usually
Exactly.
is. He usually is.
Imagine if your
nowadays he
iris
is.
looked like your mouth. That's
And it's
confusing.
crazy. It's crazy when you think about it because the only consistent design for Pac-Man is the circle with the wedge cut out of it. Every other representation of Pac-Man is always different. Like
He generally
on
has
the
red
cabinet
boots.
art,
That's probably the closest thing
so
you get.
oftentimes
to
boots.
consistency.
Sometimes he's got a little Robin Hood hat. Sometimes he's got a little bowler cap or something like that.
Yeah, taken from Pac-Land, the animated series, which then got a game based off of it.
Wasn't it the
and-
other way? I thought Pac-Man
Oh.
was a game.
All right, you're probably right. I can never remember.
Pac-Man was they based the character design on the American Saturday morning cartoon.
All right, so
It
what's
came out in
that?
They
Japan,
really did.
and then when it came to the US, they redid some of the visuals and music to be close to the actual cartoon. So I think it's
And sometimes Pac-Man has like a big long nose. Sometimes he doesn't. And also the ghosts always have a little bit of changes here and there. But the design is so important to this, and that's why I think the character design is a huge deal here. Because before this, in video games, what did you have? Like, even the most popular game would probably be, like, design-wise, would be the Space Invaders Aliens, which there is no default Space Invaders alien shape. There's, like, just a general shape that you can have it, like, there are emoji, you know, that are non-copyright infringing Space Invader emoji, because you can do any variation on the thing, and people know, oh, yeah, video games. Yeah, right, got it. But with Pac-Man, you can't really do that, because the characters cannot be genericized in a way, I guess.
There's no doubt with Pac-Man that this game approached, and I think it's just hugely important for what Pac-Man is that it approached, and the creator of the game, Toru Iwatani, I hope I got that right, basically said, I was making a game kind of to be appealing. I wanted the character to be appealing, and he does sort of say for ladies, for women, for people that were going to arcades with partners, or just kind of, you know, they were going to arcades, but there were no games for them. He's like, they don't want to play these games. I'm going to make a nice, roundly, appealing, fun sort of character, you know, and that's why, you know, the colors of the ghosts aren't, like, evil colors. They're just, like, pastels for, like, that's not normal ghost colors, is it? No, they're pastels. And so when you get this, it's like, okay, so it is actually very roundly appealing, and people see Pac-Man and they're like, oh, that's nice. I want to see what this game's about. Because it's not a sport game, it's not a violence game, really. It's
that's
just
a good point you make. This game is basically for everybody. Anyone can get into this game and enjoy it, no matter what they are.
I think that's kind of the key to Pac-Man's success. Other than look, Pac-Man's an excellent game. It's extremely well designed. But I think the fact that anyone feels like they could just walk up to the machine, and then it's like, okay, what do you do? Okay, you only have one stick, and you can only go 4 directions, and you're like, all right, that's nice, and it's simple. I can follow that. The cute little yellow guy runs from these cute little ghosts, and I can follow what's going on, because everything in this game is super easy to understand. Like, you know, you get these pellets, they disappear, I guess I gotta get more. There's a big pellet, it must do something different. It does, it lets you eat ghosts. Then the ghosts go back to their spawn house and come back out. Everything just fits so easily for someone who doesn't understand games, and it's appealing to someone who doesn't want to, you know, engage with, you know, like, even something like Pong is kind of like, oh, it's a competitive game. It's a competition game that you have to beat other players at. Whereas this is just do as well as you can, and then you get to eat some ghosts, I guess. And that's really nice.
Yeah, I just wanted to backtrack a bit to the appeal of Pac-Man's design. For how simplistic it is also very iconic. Like, even for its time, it's just something that immediately stood out, and through all the modifications have stood the test of time, and I just wanted to throw some arbitrary shade towards modern games, but I think we would all agree here that Pac-Man is more iconic than, I don't know, Nathan Drake or Marcus Phoenix or any of those modern-day humanoid gruffmen jagoffs that just became, like, the cookie-cutter template for the video game protagonist for, like, the last freaking decade.
Well, I mean, Satenga, though, to be fair, like, how do you have, I mean, a realistic-looking person type of character that is iconic? You know, that's a pretty tough thing. You got to give him some unique piece of clothing, or give her some kind of, like, crazy hair color that nobody else has, or something like that. And it's just not possible with the level of abstraction with the early arcade games. It was possible, but I think more to the point, what you're saying, Satenga, I think is accurate even back then in the early 80s. How many early 80s arcade games have that kind of iconic character? Like, you know, I'd say maybe like Donkey Kong, definitely. Dig Dug, maybe.
Well, I think part of it is what you'll notice if you go back and you look at a lot of 80s games, especially post-Pac-Man games, there's so many that saw Pac-Man and the Pac-Man game, and not just, they didn't necessarily make maze games, but they were like, all right, we need a cute character, we need like a approachable character. So you have these like thousands of these monstrosities that are kind of like some person who really doesn't understand appeal, but is trying to make an appealing character, and they're all these like...
Well, I mean, even Namco fell victim to this, in a sense.
Yeah.
Like Rally X. I mean, in the sense that it's not just a maze game, it's a... and I can't take credit for this, so this is definitely a Jeremy Parrish thing, but he pointed out that this is Pac-Man is a territory claiming game, where you're eating the dots, and so what you're really doing is you're claiming the territory. Namco made a lot of territory claiming games after this. Rally X was a big one, I think.
I wouldn't count Rally X. I got information about this. They were in development at approximately the same time.
They probably was approximately okay. But like, you know, there are other games like Make Tracks and stuff, not necessarily Namco games, but And they were still doing games like this for a couple years. Like we call them maze games. So they're really territory claiming games.
Well, even
And
like
Dig Dug
Q-Bart is basically that at its core.
Would you say that in a way, though, that Splatoon is the current most evolution of territory claiming? Because that's literally how the game works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's elements that, even if you, especially, and this is something that people like to point out about Pac-Man, if you take a lot of games and you just sort of tilt the axes to above, you start to get Pac-Man, because essentially you've got mazes that you move through, and especially if you got something like Splatoon, where you actually just see the map from above, it does become a kind of competitive Pac-Man in its way. And they have really good on Nintendo with the Splatoon characters, because those are really genuinely distinctive.
You can still do it in 2015. Most game developers are just lazy and want everyone to look like Sam Worthington for some reason.
It's not laziness as much as it is. It's very difficult to sell a new idea to people, and if you have
I guess.
Well, yes and no. I mean, you look at like what's still the big shooter on the market now, even now, like probably a year after the fact, is Overwatch and stuff like that. It's like those are they really tried hard to make those characters look like you could spot them by silhouette.
Yeah, and I think that worked out.
Special because that's also by Blizzard, who are a company that are just they're just like, okay, here's our game, buy it, and they have a.
I mean, but they tried to make it because they knew that would make the game more accessible.
No, it's very very clear, good effort from them. So one reason that these games and even Overwatch kind of will struggle to be as distinctive is Pac-Man didn't just make $1 billion. It sold $1 billion worth of merchandise as well back in the 80s.
Right.
So,
which I think is all from the strength of just the really crude but effective character design. It's a game that has a personality, which is something you can't really say about pretty much anything that came before it.
Anything about like the ship from Space Invaders, can you?
No, you can't. I think that's right, Bob.
We do have Donkey Kong, but that came the next year. We also have The Adventures of Robbie Roto. That came next year. If anyone remembers Robbie Roto, I don't know.
Well, the trick with Donkey Kong is I don't think it's nearly as approachable because there's so much extra complexity in that game. Like, I won't say it stole iconography, but it is basically the King Kong iconography that has been shifted into a game.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was the very first game ever that we know of to have Mario in it, and he wasn't even the focus. He'd have to wait 4 years to become arguably the greatest video game character ever.
Yeah, at that point he was just Jumpman, and it was kind of like a weird. But I mean, let's not really like we're kind of selling Pac-Man short by skipping straight ahead to Donkey Kong. And Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong is a year later, but it basically is. It's the same thing as Miss Pac-Man, which I think is the elephant in the room here, which is Miss Pac-Man is everything Pac-Man is, but 1 billion times better. But it can't. That and Donkey Kong both, I think, can't really. Somebody would do this eventually, but they can't really. They're both building on what Pac-Man did in a sense of creating a cartoon-like environment that is compelling to players.
This game didn't have to be as good or as kind of future-proof as it was. This game could have been, I really genuinely think, about 50% worse, and it would have done just about as well with its art and its sort of the time when it was released. But the game is incredibly solidly built, and the way that the AI works is superb. The fact that they've designed the ghosts, so one ghost, which is of course the red one, Blinky, he's basically always hounding your ass. Like he's on the back of you all the time. But the other
I think that's why he's called the Shadow, I believe.
Yes, he's called Shadow in the English version, and they much more direct Chaser in the Japanese one. And I think Pinky, which is is called Speedy. I think Pinky's trying to end up in front of you most of the time.
Yeah, Pinky keeps trying to quote Slim Pickens, head you off at the pass. So
you have this constant sense they're actually trying to get to you, which I think is something that even Donkey Kong itself, Donkey Kong doesn't really have that kind of. It's not adaptive AI, but it like this sort of AI that kind of feels like it's moving around you, into you. The AI essentially in Donkey Kong is there's fire and it moves through the level and barrels bounce. Like this has quite a depth to the four ghosts that I think is a lot more. It's quite compelling for what it is, and they really thought about it and they went, okay, well, it's got to feel like a chase, but it can't feel like it's unfair to you, and you can't feel like you're also not being chased. Like, there's this really cool thing in this game where they chase you for a bit, and then after a certain amount of time passes, they actually go into wander mode, where they kind of go back to their corners. So it's kind of like there's moments of tension where the ghosts come in to get you, and if you survive long enough, they actually break off their pursuit, and you get like a little bit of breathing room before they come up to you again.
Yeah, and also the game breaks up a little bit where when you eat the power pellet, and all the ghosts turn blue, and they can be eaten by you, which is one of the most satisfying things in video games up to this point, but also is a thing that kind of breaks up the pattern of what they're doing, because at that point they all move slower, but they're all moving away from you. Suddenly they all have the same AI, in a sense, or the same algorithm, and they're all trying to get as far away from you as they can, but they're moving very slowly. And that's I think also the hunter becomes the hunted thing is incredibly satisfying, and that's something that did not really happen in games to my knowledge prior to this.
And I love the fact that it's a power-up, but it's not something kind of really bland, like, oh, now you're in... Because it's not even you're invincible, and it's not like now you have a gun, or now you... You know, like, it's almost the exact same mechanics that you already had, but you have power now, in a way? Like, it's a lot more interesting than suddenly Pac-Man just whips out a gun and starts shooting the ghosts instead of instead of them doing something. No, they turn blue, their directions flip, and they start bouncing randomly away.
Scared.
And yeah, they go, like, they're scared, and you get the sense that they are running away from you. And the great thing is, because the power-up runs out, you know, you got this bit where you're like, I'm gonna get him, I'm gonna get him, I'm gonna get him, and then he starts flashing blue and white, and you're like, and so you're trying to eat them, and just as you're about to eat them, they're like, okay, I'm a ghost now, and they catch you, like, no!
Yeah, it happens to me way too much.
I mean, okay, so I think we praised this game enough. Before we rank it, I do want to talk about some of the things that it did, in a sense, like the limits to its vision. Forward-thinkingness or revolutionary aspects of its design are undercut by a couple things. So first is the most obvious thing, which we alluded to before, is Ms. Pac-Man. Ms. Pac-Man is everything Pac-Man is, but better. It came out, it was basically like an officially sanctioned ROM hack in a sense. If you want to know the history of it, you should look it up. It's we won't reiterate it for you. It's a pretty famous story.
Yeah,
but basically some people were going to make a Pac-Man hack, and it eventually got picked up by Pac-Man's North American distributor and put out as a quasi-official sequel that Namco didn't actually sanction. But as the decades go by, they've kind of recognized it as being like a really great game that they should probably put out in place of Pac-Man.
Sometimes I think a lot of people confuse their memories of Pac-Man and Mrs. Pac-Man, because Mrs. Pac-Man, you know, very steadily replaced Pac-Man machines, and most Pac-Mans that you can play now are probably actually going to be Mrs. Pac-Man. It's not that Pac-Man's bad, it's just pushed to the side a little bit.
Yeah, Miss Pac-Man is better in every conceivable way. There's not one thing where you're like, well, Miss Pac-Man is mostly better, but it's missing a certain Pac-Man charm. No, it's 100% better all the time.
Yeah,
it's different mazes that change as you progress. I think there's 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm. Sounds about right.
That's the main difference. It's also got these little interstitial cutscenes so that you see Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man meet, and then they have the Pac Baby, and it repeats.
Oh, there are Pac-Man cutscenes, by the way. There's a handful in the regular Pac-Man. They're just not very.
First game to ever have cutscenes that I know about.
I'd say that's one or two. That kind of really gives you something to look forward to more than anything.
Space Invaders 2, I believe, came out before Pac-Man and had a intermissions, because I don't think they obviously didn't call them cutscenes. They're just little intermissions at this point where
sounds
stuff happens. Right. But it's all the same. I think this is one of the first games that people also experienced with any sort of intermission. But
that's not really the improvement. The big improvement is that the maze changes each time. So there's at least a few different mazes. I think the number is 4, but it might be just 3. But I think it's
a slight sidebar. You will probably barely see just random arcade machines anywhere nowadays. A sad state as it is. But if you do, more than likely it will be a Ms. Pac-Man machine doubled with Galaga, another Namco classic, which we actually ranked before. The Ms. Pac-Man Galaga craze was fairly prevalent in even places I knew about. But arcades are probably deader than dead nowadays.
It was something for a while. Yeah, those are 2 of the best early arcade games ever, if not the best prior to Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers and stuff like that. But anyway, the point is, but here's the thing: even Ms. Pac-Man dropped the ball in a sense, because both Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, the versions you're most likely to find in arcades nowadays, if they aren't just reproductions made by Namco, official reproductions, you go to any one of those barcade type setups where you find they get vintage arcade machines they buy at auctions and flea markets and stuff, and there is I would say probably 70% chance that if you find one, you're going to be playing a ROM hack. You're going to be playing a speed up hack. A lot of people don't realize this, but both games, the most common versions to find are speed up hacks.
I have actually played one of these all the way back last time, several years ago, when I was at Wildwood, New Jersey. There's one of those in one of the buildings by the boardwalk. It was weird. It was, I'd say, admittedly fun, but that is also at the same time kind of bogus at like the real games being replaced by this simulacrum.
It's better. It's better in every conceivable way. Like it is better. Like the speed up thing, all it does is it speeds up the Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man character. And that character moves faster, and I think the ghosts move at about the same speed. So it makes the game a little bit easier, but it also makes it a little bit more frantic. And it's a huge difference, and that's why, the reason why it's really hard. If you're in North America and you want to buy a Pac-Man board or Ms. Pac-Man board, it's probably harder to find an untouched one than it is to find a modded one that has the ROM hack on it. Because people would get this, they'd buy it, arcade owners, and then they would see they'd be selling these mod kits cheap to get it better, because players preferred the faster versions. And to the point where I have been to my home turf barcade, which is just called Barcade Jersey City, is their Ms. Pac-Man is a speed up hack one. And I had a couple beers with like the guy who has the record on that machine in particular, and his record is just pornographically huge, and I will never touch it. But he was like telling me all these tricks, but I told him, he knows all this stuff about the game. He's like, it's actually like kind of two games, like early on in the game before it gets too fast, it's like this, and then later on it's like that. And he knows all this stuff about the game, and I busted some knowledge on his ass and said, did you realize the game you're playing is a hack? It's not the original Ms. Pac-Man. He had no clue.
Nice.
This guy who's been playing the game since it was brand new, like when I was like a toddler. He's been playing Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man since they were fresh off the boat, so to speak. And he didn't realize that, because that's how he remembers the games being. And if that kind of improvement can be made to the games so quickly and so readily, that's a missed opportunity on the designer's part. They never quite caught on. And to this day, when you get a Namco, official reproduction of Pac-Man, like the Namco Museum series and for the PlayStation and all that, it's the slow version. It's the original version, and it feels slow and kind of not so good. Whereas when you play Pac-Man Championship Edition or any of the new,
really good
the current versions of Pac-Man, they all incorporate this. So what they do is they allow you to speed up the more pellets you eat. And so as the longer you play a maze or a stage, the faster you get. And so it kind of incorporates both of those things. And it's a great way of taking like the best, and I've never heard them acknowledge this, but I'm pretty sure it's true, is they realized, like the versions that in most countries that are the most popular are actually not our versions. They are ROM hacks. So that's something. It's not so much a criticism of the game, but it's more like if it was that easy to fix and that obvious, they should have done it. It didn't make the game less profitable. If anything, it made it more fun and more profitable.
I feel like part of early Pac-Man was, if it played faster, I'm not sure it would have... it probably wouldn't have made a huge difference, but I feel like people... when we come and look at Pac-Man, we've played quite a few games. Even new players are going to have played a few games. I don't know, maybe the slower speed was something that they felt was necessary to sort of give new players the ability to even work out how the game plays as such. I think it speeds up a little bit the longer you play. I think the levels get progressively faster.
But the ghosts get faster too. It's just all the speed up hack does, it makes Pac-Man faster from the beginning.
Yes,
and it seems like that's going to make the game easier, and it does for maybe like the first two rounds. But after that, it's your problems are going to be the same, which is that you don't anticipate the ghost movements well enough, and you just run into them. I guess we got to rank this thing, and that was my main criticism of it, is that it could be fixed or made better. It was made better rather easily by basically unofficial means. I mean, this is basically like the romhacking.net of its day.
I had read that
drastically.
The American version had been sped up, and I'd read this, but now I'm wondering if what I was reading got confused and had believed that it was officially sped up when it was in fact not.
It's possible. I know. I don't know for sure about the original Pac-Man. I don't know, but it's basically the same thing. Whereas, what was it? Williams?
Published by Midway.
Midway. Okay, Midway.
Yeah, in the US.
Whoever, yeah, Midway or the publisher recognized it and they basically hacked the game themselves. That may be true. I can't remember how it works for the original Pac-Man. All I know is that even Ms. Pac-Man, which was in and of itself a ROM hack, is now it's almost impossible to find an unmodded Ms. Pac-Man board because it was further modded from there. So I might be confusing those two, but it doesn't matter because the principle is the same, which is that somebody who didn't make the game, the unofficial version of the game, is better than the official version. And I think that is something that has to be considered because a lot of our best memories of Pac-Man are probably from modded arcade boards. If you remember it, and it's playing it in the 80s and 90s, you're probably playing a modded version of it.
So the question is, on what version did Billy Mitchell set his high score?
I don't know. I was just thinking about that.
Really?
I'm not sure that he... It's one of those things that it's something that I think a lot of people know. Like, if Billy Mitchell set his score on something, if Namco recognized it, I think they would have had to verify the board. I know that Nintendo does that with Donkey Kong boards.
Yeah.
Does it super matter? I know it might sound like it would, but when you get to that
really,
point...
Because at a certain point, you move so fast, you don't... It makes no difference.
The guy hit the kill screen on the system. I don't think, like, the
starting beyond the first kill screen. Right, so at a certain point, the game...
Kill screen coming up, yeah. So at a certain point, the game famously at level 256, is it? I think just because it's an 8-bit
hexadecimal system.
The
Hexadecimal system,
literal end of math that the board can process.
It's actually to do with the fruit.
garbled.
It tries to draw too many fruit, and so it freaks out.
Too many fruit.
Or something along those lines. It is.
I'm sorry,
but okay. So we want to put this somewhere.
So
my real opinion is whether it does or doesn't go kind of at the top.
No.
I mean, I know you're a big fan of Mario, so you just kind of try and.
I'm also a big fan of Galaga, but I have to admit that Galaga does not belong in the top 10.
Galaga is a little. I feel it's a little different because it's not. It isn't. It hasn't had the same impact as Pac-Man did.
It hasn't, but it's also a. Impact is not the only thing, right? So
Pac-Man is really in a precarious place where it is one of the most influential games ever that there isn't really as much reason to play as now, except for historical respect.
I'm thinking over Doom. Is that too high?
I was maybe thinking somewhere it's somewhere around the spectrum, but
it's a cool video game. It is if you want
video game, the game. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to put it below Metal Gear Solid.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm saying that is mostly that, although as important as it is, as great as it is, if you were to say, oh my God, you've never played Pac-Man, what you should do is play Pac-Man? No, you wouldn't. You'd say play Ms. Pac-Man. You'd probably say play a speed-up hack of Ms. Pac-Man, which is the better one. Or you would say play Pac-Man Championship Edition, which is Namco's own creation. It's not hacked, and it is incredible. And it really is. Now, that's years and decades later, and decades of hindsight, but the principle of it is the same, which is that I'm saying that like there are improvements upon Pac-Man. Like would I rank? It's a similar question. If somebody asked us to rank Space Invaders, I would put it below Galaga. Although it's a huge deal, and it kind of did a shooter in a way that I'm not sure shooters would have taken that fixed screen thing. I know they would have existed at some point, but I don't know whether they would have done like the descending rows of enemies. That was pretty unique and cool, and a lot of people copied it. But Galaga is like, don't play Space Invaders, play Galaga, or play Gapless or something. Don't play Space Invaders. And I feel the same way about Pac-Man.
Telling like, that Space Invaders, you don't recommend Space Invaders necessarily, but Pac-Man, it's always just but play Pac-Man, but Pac-Man again. You're taking the same game essentially, and
I mean there would be no Ms. Pac-Man without Pac-Man. I'm not, and just the same as there would be no Galaga without Space Invaders. I'm just saying that,
or Galaxian.
Well, yeah, but that's.
So I'm being persnickety.
Yes,
but like Mrs. Pac-Man is very much a like you could have discreetly released
Ms. Pac-Man. She's not married yet. Ms. Pac-Man.
Yeah,
they have a child and they're not married. That's scandalous.
Hey, no shaming. It was very progressive for its time. Let's say that. Let's not
struck a blow for women's lib.
There we have it.
Yeah, it's very sad.
But like Ms. Pac-Man. You could have discreetly released it as a patched version, and I mean, like, Namco themselves could have just said, all right, well, this is Pac-Man, we're just releasing a new iteration of Pac-Man
1.5,
1.5, and people would have been like, yeah, that's fine, that's the new arcade, that's the new Pac-Man board, it doesn't do, it's different, but, it just changes a little bit of the AI, changes the mazes. These are things that, you could do after anyway. It's not...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I get what your point is. I'm just saying, like, I feel like you can't change the fact that the best Pac-Man game is actually not made by Namco. Of the classic Pac-Man games, it's unquestionably Ms. Pac-Man, and beyond that, it's the speed-up hack version of Ms. Pac-Man. It's just crazy. It's weirdness upon weirdness when you think about it. And the other thing I guess I just want to say about, like, Pac-Man is the reason why another reason not to place it too high on the list is because you don't need to encourage people to play Pac-Man. There's a million opportunities to play it. Everybody knows Pac-Man because it is the most famous.
We need to encourage people to play Superman 64? Super Mario 64. Sorry,
you
said
fool!
the wrong game.
Fool! Let's encourage them to play both so that you get an idea of what an amazing and a horrible video game is.
Sorry, they have the same name, but we put Super Mario 64 at the top, and it's that is not a game that people need to play because it is.
I disagree. I feel like people are missing something in the evolution of that kind of genre if they don't play Super Mario 64.
I think people are missing something if they don't play a Pac-Man game, though.
They are, but I don't know that you need to encourage... Like, Super Mario 64 is overshadowed by the fact that it's just another Super Mario game. Like, which game do you play? Oh, I'm going to play New Super Mario Bros. I'm going to play New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I'm going to play New Super Mario Bros. Wii U. I'm going to play New Super Mario Bros. 3DS. I'm going to play... there are so many of them. At this point, it's like you got to point out, like, or I'm going to play Super Mario Bros. 3D Land, or you got to point somebody to, like, no, if you're going to play this, like, you should really go back and play Super Mario Bros. 64. It is worth it. It is worth playing. It is a game that holds up, and that's why I would put it at the top in the sense that although everybody knows that character, I think most people who know that character don't know that game anymore.
But on the flip side, other than that, could be an argument for Pac-Man. The fact that Pac-Man, the basic game, Pac-Man, is still a part of, people don't have to go back and play Pac-Man because they're playing Pac-Man right now because Pac-Man is still there in pretty much the exact same way that they made a game in 1980 where its bones, its skeleton is still pretty much the exact same almost 30 years later. Is that not incredibly impressive?
It is incredibly impressive. I just don't know whether you get the same benefit from going back to it as you do with Super Mario 64 or Super Mario Bros. 3. Yeah. But your point is well taken, I think. Which is that maybe I'm lowballing this a little bit, just because I feel like it was so quickly and drastically improved upon. But that doesn't change the fact that somebody had to do it first, and they did it. And you do. It's true. If you say, hey, go back and play the original, unaltered, actual Pac-Man, get an idea, and just.
If you could position yourself in the 1980s mindset at all and play Pac-Man, you'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, I understand why this game was huge.
Go play Asteroids and go play
Tempest.
I don't know what else you would have that predates Pac-Man that's worth
Battlezone, around the same
Space
time.
Invaders, and stuff like that, and then play Pac-Man. And get an idea. Pong, play that, and get an idea for what games were before Pac-Man, and you'll see the personality of it. And that is something that is worth appreciating, especially if you want to get an idea for what it means to make it is the moment where video games not necessarily burst onto the cultural consciousness, but that became I think that was the point where anybody who had a brain would have to realize, oh, these aren't going away. These are just going to stick around forever. Although people might have wanted to dismiss it as a fad, you look at Pac-Man, you got to say, like, there is something to this. Like, there is something here that can be built upon and built upon and built upon, and they will just keep making video games forever, whether I like them or not. In the same sense that, like, when they first made the first, like, animated cartoons, right? That it was a novelty at first, but at a certain point, you're like, okay, you got Mickey Mouse. Okay, I guess they could just do this forever. Like, there's really no limit to what you can do with this. I think that's the real greatness of Pac-Man. Is it was just kind of the first realization of, oh, video games are limitless possibilities for, like,
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about this sort of period of Pac-Man. I really think that before Pac-Man, video games existed, but they were a gimmick. They existed. People were like, oh yeah, that's like any other toy. That's not a medium to which you basically invent everything. Like before Pac-Man, video games weren't movies, they weren't music, they weren't TV, they weren't radio, they weren't a thing that was going to be around. It was just like, oh, that's a gimmick for children. And Pac-Man was like, hey, now everyone's going to play Pac-Man. And suddenly it's like, oh, I guess that's it. Now,
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
they
Mickey
exist.
Mouse is a great comparison, actually.
Yeah.
Now that I didn't do that intentionally. I wasn't thinking about that in advance, but I think that makes sense. Okay, so I'll move it up. So I was going to say below Metal Gear Solid. I'm going to move it up now to below Doom, above Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past.
Okay.
And the reason why I won't put it above Doom is because I feel like Doom has, in a sense, a much
Doom
more
has a huge
drastic,
cultural impact in the
lasting
same
impact.
way.
Yeah, that. Whereas they don't really make a lot of games like Pac-Man anymore, unless maybe Metal Gear Solid in the sense.
That's why I didn't want to put it below Metal Gear Solid. I'm like, come on, that's like Pac-Man with a plot.
Yeah, I mean, well, yes and no, but I feel like, in a sense, like only games like Doom and such could be had more of a lasting impact on the genre. But Pac-Man has a cultural impact that even Doom can't touch, and even Mario can't touch.
No, nobody can touch it. Pac-Man is like, I don't know, like Kleenex or something. It's just like, oh yeah, it's a brand that's become the thing that it is, and that's
It'll
crazy
be around
for video
forever.
games.
Even though, I mean, in a way, it's kind of fitting that we did this after Sonic Adventure, right? Because Sonic Adventure is an example of like, well, the character's not going to die, but the game sure did, and. Like the character has a much more lasting impression on. Yeah,
because
people love Sonic the Hedgehog. Most people you
play him because you're like, hopefully part of this game will be good.
You want it to live up to the character, and it almost never does. Just from a statistically speaking, almost never does.
That's fair.
And that's not saying that there aren't good new Sonic games that are being made, but they just don't live up to the promise. I don't get the appeal of Sonic. To me, Sonic always seems like a crude, crass marketing gimmick. But that's because I was the original market. So I'm allowed to say that. Everybody else, though, it sticks with them because there's like a design element to Sonic that I think is really appealing to people. But the thing is, they're kind of in the same boat because, like, Mario's kind of a crappy character, in a sense, because, like, they just keep making Mario games and people kind of like him because he's an affable goofball. But
Mario's interesting because you can see every single character in the Mario franchise that isn't Mario is kind of more popular with the fan base, not like the game themselves. But it's like, oh, Luigi's crazy and Wario's an asshole, and like Peach is at least something. But Mario is like
kind of a cipher. Yeah, he's just kind of whatever you need him to be. Now he's golfing. Now he's playing tennis. Now he's controlling a breakout paddle. I don't know why. It just is.
Alleyway. Nice reference.
Yes, thank you.
I like that
I grew up
Pac-Man somehow is... Pac-Man didn't really take up a bunch of other things. I know he went go-karting with Mario, but for the most part, he just kind of... He's Pac-Man. He just does Pac-Man things.
Yeah, he's around.
Defined by being the Pac-Man.
He's here. Because video games exist, Pac-Man will survive. I guess really the Mickey Mouse comparison is great because Mickey Mouse, as soon as like Donald Duck and Goofy and Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and all those other characters come out, it's like, who needs Mickey Mouse? He's kind of like a nobody at that point, but he's so famous that he just survives forever because the design, you can pick it out in a silhouette. You can draw it in like with a can of spray paint. It's so simple that it works and it will last forever just because the design is that good. And I think Sonic is in a sense like that, and Pac-Man definitely is. That's where games went. And so who disagrees with me about below Doom? Right below Doom.
I think
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm quite good with that as well. I was wondering even if Pac-Man is going to claim number one, but I do have to agree that maybe it's more really historical for anything that's as high as it is. But
I don't want Pac-Man to be considered just historical. I think it's... I'm not going to try and push it any higher, but it is Pac-Man as a character, and this is the game that drove him to the spotlight. But he also drove his own game to the spotlight. It's... it is the whole package here, and it's kind of a tough one because it's like, this is a game that came out of the ether in many ways, it's every other game in the list, it pretty much almost exclusively had something that it could look back to and say, well, I had that idea and I took that idea. Pac-Man is just like, let's make a Pac-Man thing. Like, they just sort of threw it together from whatever they had lying around in terms of concepts, because it is such an early release, and it is the first truly successful video game character, which is very important. That's all for this episode of Hardcore Gaming 101's Top Games podcast. Special thanks goes out to KK Kickflip and They Call Me the Swede on iTunes for nominating these games, and thanks to those of you who didn't get to yet, we will be getting to you soon. Thanks as well to my lovely co-hosts and compatriots, our editor Jeff Rude, our theme song composer Muteki, our technical assistant and video editor Bobinator, and of course the support and feedback of listeners like you. You can support this podcast by making a small monthly donation at patreon.com/HG101, by subscribing to the HG101 YouTube channel, and by following at GC9X and at HG_101 on Twitter. But most importantly, help us claw our way into the podcasting firmament by getting on iTunes. From there, subscribe to HG1 and give us all your best reviews. Do it!
Or else I'll take them from you by force!
Until next week, keep keeping it real.